Waiting is a liminal kind of space. It is the time and emotional equivalent of being in a doorway between rooms. No longer in the first room, but not yet in the next. It is liminal, in between. Waiting can be enormously frustrating, or it can be a space to be celebrated. When we are eager for the next thing we're doing, having to wait can be uncomfortable. When we are afraid of the next thing, we might prefer to stay in that liminal space as long as we can. And sometimes the waiting in between is exactly what we need in order to move on to the next thing. I remember when I moved here from St. Louis last summer, I drove. I had some friends help me load up the rental truck, and I headed east. I drove across southern Illinois. First I crossed the Mississippi River. I drove across southern Illinois and Indiana. I drove down through Kentucky and then into West Virginia, up into Maryland, across into Delaware, and finally down Route 40 through the beautiful farm country to Galloway. The trip took several days, and that was intentional. I wanted to spend some time in between. I needed to be in between the place I had called home and the place I would call home. That time of transition was important for me. The physical act of driving that route solidified the experience in my body in a way that paying movers to do the work and flying here would not have done. I was fully aware of the transitional waiting time within that move. We are in Lent. For those who follow the Christian liturgical calendar, Lent marks the time between Ash Wednesday and Good Friday. It is a time when Christians commemorate the 40 days that Jesus of Nazareth spent fasting in the desert before the start of his ministry. The period culminates in a confusingly non-chronological fashion with the celebration of Holy Week and his crucifixion and resurrection. For the casual observer, it appears that Jesus' ministry lasted 40 days. That's not actually how that worked, but that's how the calendar works. Now, Christians of various stripes and flavors mark this liminal time in ways that are meaningful to them. Catholics will sometimes fast during the day, not unlike Muslims do during Ramadan. Or they may abstain from eating meat or one of their favorite foods. When I was a child, I was encouraged to give up chocolate for Lent. There wasn't really a whole lot of choice. Adults would often give up alcohol or cigarettes or some other bad habit that they enjoyed. Our whole family ate fish on Fridays for those 6 weeks, which I have to say was not a sacrifice I experienced. Certainly not like chocolate. On Easter, we were allowed to go back to whatever it was we had given up for Lent. Hence, the Easter bunny was particularly generous in my house. Easter dinner mostly went uneaten for me. I often found it perverse that St. Patrick's Day was placed squarely in the middle of Lent. I wondered what we had done to upset the Pope. But I believe the Irish in my world were either granted or took a day of dispensation in order to honor our patron saint. Old Patrick was problematic, to be sure, but that's a sermon for later this month. Other Christians sometimes use Lent as a period of contemplation and mindfulness, and some will take on a practice they wish to nurture in themselves, patience perhaps, or avoiding negative self-talk. Some commit to an exercise regimen, some take up journaling or some other spiritual practice. Whatever they do, people are mindfully observing this liminal space. Others might call it the time around the vernal equinox instead of Lent, which is those weeks between the dark and cold of winter and the warmth and light of spring. It is the time of seed catalogs and graph paper gardening, of planning for the summer as we tend our fires still to keep warm. Our stewardship season is going to last 6 weeks this year, not unlike Lent. We kick it off today, we'll wrap it up with a dinner in April, and this is a time when we will engage in mindful consideration about what Unitarian Universalism means to us, and what this congregation represents, both within these walls and in the larger community that surrounds us. Stewardship is a time when we take stock of what we've accomplished in the past year, think about what we want to do in the coming year, and consider what we will need to do to make those things a reality. Our theme this year is more than the sum of our parts, and I think it's fitting. As I have spent the last 8 months getting to know you, I have learned that there is a lot of diversity in this congregation. There are many different styles of education that people have acquired, some in academia, some in the trades, some from life. People here come from many backgrounds and cultures, from a broad spectrum of socioeconomic origins. Some have overcome tremendous hardship and trauma. Some are still living with challenges that others might find impossible to bear. As individuals, we are unique. Each has our own story of origin and our own story that brought us here, to this room, to this place in our spiritual journey. And yet we are more than a simple collection of individuals. We are a voice for progressive ethical morality in this part of the world. We are a witness for Black Lives Matter, for social justice of all kinds, and for a type of religion that does not rely on shame or fear of punishment in order to offer salvation and peace. When we sing on a Sunday morning, we sing. And when we sit together and worship, we open our hearts and our minds together, sharing in the learning and growth experience of that hour. Sometimes we breathe together, bringing our bodies into a shared rhythm of respiration and awareness. What we have here is not a thing we can get in a lot of other places. I don't know a place where a group as diverse as this can gather for worship in a place with our diverse understanding of the holy, which in itself is a spectrum of beliefs and skepticism, to share this kind of experience while our children are taught in accordance with our values. There's just not another place within more than an hour's drive of here that offers this. This place is special. It is more than a building and some warm bodies. We are more than the sum of our parts. And here we are in the liminal space of stewardship season. We are in between. We are in the waiting period between our aspirations and our realizations. Now, stewardship is one of my favorite kinds of periods of waiting. The budget has been prepared, priorities figured out, figures added up, there are pie charts and statements. We have a goal, and we have a fun visual challenge, and you've got a minister who doesn't mind talking about money and what it means for a congregation. Time, talent, and treasure are necessary for the health and function of any organization. We need people to volunteer their time, to serve on boards and committees, to mow the lawn, make coffee, and do the work of governance and leadership. We need people's talents. We need you to offer your skills at building or fixing and making the hardware in our office work with the software, or however that works. Helping to balance the very complex checkbook, God bless them, teaching our children and lending your voice to our choir. We need you to do all of those things, and I'll spend some time later this month talking more about them. But today, I want to talk a little bit about money. Boy, but isn't money delicate stuff. I have done work as a political fundraiser and as a sexuality educator. And I've got to tell you, people are much more willing to talk about the intimate details of their sexual dysfunction than they are to tell me how much they owe on their mortgage or in credit card debt. It's really kind of absurd. Now, I don't know if this is an American thing or a Western thing or a human thing or what, but we, and by we I mean most of the people I have ever met, absolutely hate talking about money. Except those of us who are like fundraisers. We get all excited about it. But everybody else is like, So my husband and I, no. There is so much shame and embarrassment around our relationship with money. So much shame and embarrassment that it affects how we are able to use money in healthy, productive ways. Money is a tool, nothing more and nothing less. It is without moral value of its own. It is not a sin to have lots of it, and it is not a sin to have none. Money is a tool, and we can use it to do things, or it can use us to do things. Money is but one way we have to express our values. I'm going to offer you something here. Every budget is a theological statement. Okay? Our budget can show us what it is that we worship and what we treat as an afterthought. We allot our resources according to how important a thing is in our lives. Sometimes we do it intentionally, and sometimes it's sort of unconscious. We can take a look at our financial budget and see what's important. For most people, housing cost is the biggest expense you've got, right? And then some of us have similarly large student loan debt. I actually owe more on student debt than my house. No, really. Then there's food and utilities, a car perhaps, stuff like internet, clothes, recreation such as technology or vacations, and eventually, support for the church. We do the same thing with our time and how we budget that. Now, ideally, we budget a third of our minutes in a day to sleeping, which seems kind of scary when you think of it. But then we spend close to that much time working, for those who work full-time, and that leaves one more third, or a little bit more, to be split up among the things we value. And how we prioritize those things can reveal how much we value different things. How much time do we spend with our families? How much time do we spend running errands? How much time do we spend poking at computer games? Staring at our phones? Do you really want to track how many hours you're on Facebook? I don't. What about exercising or doing self-care? Cooking and eating healthy meals? Or do we value other stuff more so that we only budget time enough to hit a drive-through on our way to something else? Our budgets reveal what we value. Our budgets reveal what we worship. Nationally, Unitarian Universalists come in just about dead last among mainstream religious groups in member contributions to the church according to the percentage of their income. Dead last. Mormons and Jews do pretty well, donating somewhere around 8% on average. And it's not that we don't do charitable giving. We are easily as philanthropic as any other predominantly white, suburban, educated cohort, which is to say not terribly, but never mind. The problem is that we give to so many organizations whose work we value. We live out our values by supporting the arts and justice work all over the globe. Yay, us. Except our last thought tends to be our home congregation. As much as I want you to support everyone, as much as I want to support everyone living out your values, I'd like you to take a look at the formula that you're using and see if there's a way to move this congregation somewhere up in the list of priorities. When I was at Andover Newton Seminary, I took a fundraising and money management class from then seminary president Nick Carter. He said that the Board of Trustees at Andover Newton had an unwritten policy for its members, that the seminary they served as trustees would be their second largest line item tax deduction, the first being reserved for their home congregation. That was the level of financial commitment that was expected of seminary trustees, that they would support their own churches first and foremost, and Andover Newton second. After that, please feel free to donate to the Audubon Society, Oxfam, GLAAD, Greenpeace, whatever. But as it was expected that the seminary trustees would pledge their support to their own religious institution and then to this interfaith institution. You're not seminary trustees. And all but 7 of you are not congregational trustees at this moment. But I'd like you to think about where the Unitarian Universalist congregation of the South Jersey Shore fits into your life and your list of priorities. How important is this place? How much do you value it? What does it mean to you? And are you supporting it in a way commensurate with that level of significance in your life? A lot of people talk about what we call a liberal tithe, which is 10% of your income devoted to charitable works, 5 to the church and the other 5 to everywhere else. That's a conversation for another day, but I don't think it's a bad model at all. Now, I need to be clear. I know that not everyone is going to be able to pledge big amounts of money. Okay, I get that. I've been there. As diverse a group as this, and we are more than the sum of our parts, I know that it is our diversity that makes us strong and makes us special. It is the fact that we have such a broad range of socioeconomic backgrounds that enriches this community. The point is, we need everyone to show up and participate, because that's what makes this place magic. All kinds of people, each doing what they can to help sustain and nurture this faith community. You are whole. You are holy. You are wholly loved. And together, we are far more than the sum of our parts. Amen.